This is one of my favorite episodes of the whole calendar year. And the funny thing is, in this episode, I almost say nothing at all. It's a lot of hand waving. Pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. And yet, this episode strikes at the very core of how I attack fantasy draft season, which I know is a little ways off, but I feel like with this new podcast feed, which again, welcome everybody to Old Man Squad Fantasy Basketball, founding member of the Old Man Squad Sports Network. I am Dan Bespris. I feel like I need to go back, not so much to the basics. That's sort of unfair to the topic material. Foundation is the word I like to use. We're rebuilding the foundation of everything that we then construct atop it in fantasy. So that you guys, those of you that have been listening for a really long time, you can let these shows serve as a little bit of a reminder episode. But those that are newer, frankly, might not have heard these types of episodes before. I didn't do a Bucketology episode last offseason. I did one the previous offseason, but last offseason, I sort of skirted around whatever you want to call it, my own specific rank board. And we got to get back to the basics. We got to get back to the foundational elements of what makes this the Old Man Squad Fantasy Basketball podcast. So thank you, everybody, for tuning in. Appreciate those of you watching live on social media. And the folks I appreciate the absolute most are the ones that are listening after the fact that also just sit and listen to the advertisements, because that's the only way that any of this is going to work. Otherwise, I got to go back to, I don't know, day job, part-time work, whatever it is. So what is Bucketology? It's a dumb word that I made up. But what is the dumb word that I made up? It's how I feel players should be ranked. Many years ago, I came out and I said, I think that what we're doing here isn't descriptive enough. A rank board is an impossible task. It can be helpful, and frankly, if you get a good one, it will be helpful. But it also doesn't answer every question. And frankly, doing a rank board leaves you open to an absolute truckload of criticism when you've got a guy ranked 36th on your board and he finishes at 39th. And people are like, you missed. But it's like, no, you didn't miss there. 36 and 39 are effectively the same player. I also think that, and it's been tweeted at me a few times, that ranks are idiotic altogether, which I also disagree with. I believe that ranks are useful if approached the right way. And as with most things in life, there's sort of like a nice midpoint on this, where I believe those of us who, I'm trying to think of the right way to say this without coming off like a butthole, those of us that have a megaphone, I think are doing a really, really good job right now of trying to educate everybody out there on how to look at a rank board. My personal feeling is they are useful, but they are, in some respects, a tiny bit flawed. And I think that we can find a way to sort of simplify this to, for one, help analysts who do a rank board not be the butt of every joke, because they are useful to a certain degree, and they're very easy to pick apart also. But at the same time, I think we can upgrade on the concept with an understanding that players can be, in my opinion, grouped into buckets. I chose buckets because it's got a basketball connection to it. You can just call them groups, you can call them tiers, whatever you want. All of those make sense. At the end of the day, and where these cutoffs are a little bit arbitrary, although at the top of the board the cutoffs are a bit more obvious because, look, frankly, you can look at the Basketball Monsters rank board is very helpful for this. They'll give you a value attached to a player, and you can see, where are there little drop-offs between guys. For instance, the top 3 this last year on a per-game basis, Joel Embiid, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, and Nikola Jokic were actually all relatively close in rank. Anthony Davis was kind of all by himself. No one was anywhere near him, above or below. And then you get to Luka, Wemby, and Kawhi is kind of like a bucket. And so it's easy to see the buckets at the end of the season. And in fact, those of you that are watching, I think I can actually probably share that Basketball Monster rank board so you guys can see the names that I'm talking about. Let's zoom in a whole bunch. There you go. There's the top of the board. So you can see the player values on the left side. Joel Embiid, 1.1. Shai, 1.04. Jokic, 1.04. Those guys are 6/100ths. It's a little fuzzy mathing on my part. I get it. But then AD is 0.93. He's 10th behind for looking at value. And then AD's 0.2 ahead of Luka. And Victor, who calls him Victor? Wemby, and Kawhi are all within 5/100ths of each other. And then there's a 9/100ths drop off to Donovan Mitchell, and so on and so forth. So you can kind of see that this is not an isolated phenomenon. This happens up and down the board. The gaps are less pronounced as you work your way down the list. And you can see it here. I'll scroll to the second round so you can see, it goes 0.48, 0.47, 0.47, 0.46, 0.45, and then 0.41, and then 0.37. So there's some kind of break point there between like Devin Booker and Scotty Barnes, and Freddie VanVleet is just sort of hovering in that break point. But that's an obvious end of one bucket, beginning of another. I theorize, I posit that we can try to find these cutoffs before the season. And that's the general idea of Bucketology. We want to group players leading up to the year in clumps. Because at the end of the day, the difference, and forget games played for a minute, not for long, but just for a little bit. And also the games played that you're seeing on your screen, if you're watching, that's including playoff games right now. So, but again, you can dump that. I really just wanted to show you guys how close a bunch of guys were ranked to each other. So yes, throw out the games played, and okay, look here, let's just redo this so you guys can get it for the actual regular season. The point I'm trying to make is these cutoffs, these strata, these tiers of players exist. They're real. They're real before the season and they're real after the season. And I think we can save analysts. The Basketball Monster page just went down for a minute. We'll just close that for a second. I think we can save analysts a lot of heartache and headache by not having to worry about sort of the 1-1-1-1-1 thing, which is damn near impossible to do. And folks have been doing it really well for a really long time. But I think I can make their lives easier by just saying, look, you may feel that a particular player is an early third round type of player. And I believe that calling them that is descriptive enough, as opposed to saying, oh, this guy's going to be ranked 27th at the end of the year. Because I believe it boxes analysts into too narrow of a window. As you just saw moments ago before the website went down, I forget who was right in front of Devin Booker. Was it Paul George that was in there? Those guys were essentially the same rank to your fantasy team, but one had to be in front of the other. That's just the way it works. But neither one made your team better or worse than the other one. So to have to rank them one integer rankings on these guys is unfair to the analyst. They don't need no, none of these analysts need me to defend them. That's not even really what I'm going for. And a lot of folks put out very useful, very helpful numerical boards all season long. B150 was one that I worked with for many years and has been outstanding. But I think that in that case, Bruce probably making his life hard. And I did a list a few years ago, and I know Josh has done a list, and Ryan Knaus did many lists for Roto World. Like, some of the absolute best minds in fantasy have done these lists, and I think I can make it easier. I love all you guys, by the way. This is me saying thank you. But I also think it's impossible. I think we've asked them, us, whoever, to do an impossible task. No one's ever going to get those right. And even if you put them in buckets, you're still not going to get them right, but you're going to get them righter. More right. Because it's just, even if it feels like a looser grip on what someone is going to be, I believe it's actually more accurate. Because, and Josh and I have talked about this on a show before. I think we talked about it this show? No, his show, one of the two leading up to the season. The difference between the example we were just talking about, like a Devin Booker and a Paul George, rank 13, rank 14, or rank 15, or whatever it is like 2 steals, something totally crazy. Because those guys are so bunched up together, right? I mean, 2 guys that have the same rank. So why don't we just put them in a bucket? I see almost no downside to this, to Bucketology. As we approach next fantasy season, we will go through. We got to see what everybody's ADP is, because that's actually going to reflect on it. And I think you can and you guys know, my goal with this show is always to simplify fantasy basketball. And I think one of the key ways we can do that is by creating our buckets and comparing them to ADP. Because the world will build their own buckets, not on purpose. We're going to do it on purpose. The universe, the fantasy universe, is going to create them by its own doing. Here, I got another window that I can show you guys. These are the ADP numbers from this last season. Let's sort by ADP last year. Nikola Jokic had an ADP of 1.2. He was in his own ADP bucket. Luka, Joel Embiid, they were kind of in the second ADP bucket. Shea, Tatum, they were kind of in their third ADP bucket. And then Giannis, Steph, Halliburton, that was the fourth ADP bucket. And then it was KD, Dame, Anthony Davis, LaMelo Ball. That was kind of the next one. Then you got to Sabonis, Kyrie, Anthony Edwards, Devin Booker. That was the next one. Does this all sound vaguely familiar? Because we talked about this leading up to last season. ADPs, people, drafts, the fantasy community created those buckets just by doing drafts and existing. Then we can go back and make our own buckets. Who did we feel was at the top? Well, I think we all agreed Jokic did kind of belong in his own number one bucket. I felt Joel Embiid and Shea were the next bucket. So then you look at that and you're like, we have Shea in bucket 2. The community at large has Shea in bucket 3. We have a check mark, possible value play. I had Kevin Durant and Anthony Davis a bucket above their ADP. KD ended up pretty much landing on his number per game, so whatever. I, of course, have Giannis lower because I tend to not punt free throws. That's a terrible example. I had LaMelo Ball and Anthony Edwards and Devin Booker. I'm trying to give you guys examples where I missed, so I don't want you to think I'm just like rattling off things where I got them right. I had LaMelo Ball, Anthony Edwards, Devin Booker, buckets below where the ADP community had them. Okay, that's a possible value avoid. I had Kyrie a bucket above where he went. By health, that didn't work. By per game, it did. And you're like, Dan, this is stupid. You're just basically telling me, look at where you have a guy and then look at their ADP and tell me if it makes sense. But that's the thing. Drafts don't go exactly the same order as the ADPs suggest on that Yahoo board that we were just talking about, that I forgot to put on the screen for those that are watching live, but now I've actually done so. Drafts don't go in that order, but they do tend to go by those ADP groupings. What we don't know is what order the guy's going to go in that group. And yes, there are, depending on what draft you're in, someone's always going to take a guy a little bit early. There are fluctuations in it that you can't predict. But for the most part, just thinking back to this last year, like it pretty much went Jokic 1, and then some either Luka or Joel Embiid 2 or 3, and then Tatum and Shea were either 4 or 5 in almost every draft. This is how it went, with little adjustments here and there. But like, if I had the third pick, I was going to go take Shea because I felt confident that I could get him. But if I waited even a tiny bit longer, there was a chance he was going to go 4 or maybe 5. What about that next grouping of players, none of whom actually turned out to be all that great, Halliburton being the best of the 3? But what if you got to that next group, which was the ADP bucket of, let's see here, that's 6, 7, and 8, Giannis, Steph, and Halliburton? If you had pick 5 and you didn't want Tatum, you kind of knew you had to take Halliburton, because if you had 6, 7, or 8, there was a chance he was going to go there. And you kind of knew that if you had picked 9, he wasn't going to get to you. But not just because he had the 8th. If you actually integered this up, he would be 8th in line. It's because they do get drafted in chunks. We just don't know what order these guys are going to go in within those chunks, because their ADPs are so close. And because people are people, we all have different opinions on things, that you can't predict it in your individual draft. You cannot predict it. But you can have a certain measure of confidence that they're going to make it to that area where their ADP bucket is. Does that make sense? I don't know if I explained that all that well, but I also don't want to repeat myself. This is why I think the idea of the bucket is so powerful, and why I think analysts have made our lives, I'll lump myself into it, although I haven't done a rank list myself, which I know is sort of like cheapo wimpy thing that I've been over the years. But this is why. I just think there's a more efficient way to do it. But I also want to caution folks not to dump ranks altogether. I've seen the pendulum swing too far that direction too, where for a long time it was like a rank is everything. And this is how a lot of things change in the world. The pendulum swings really far the other way, and then it sort of like wobbles until it hits the midpoint where we're all like, yeah, that feels right. So I do want to caution folks not to let it swing too far the other way, where you're just like, everybody's in one bucket, which I don't think anybody actually believes that is technically true. But I've had good friends yell at me on the internet that ranks are foolish and we don't need them. I think we can generally agree that that's a bit of an overstatement, because like the 30th ranked guy is better than the 80th ranked guy in fantasy sports. That's just like, it's inarguable. One of those guys is doing way more for your team than the other one. And it's the guy who has the higher rank. But as we also showed you before, again, the site went down, these guys exist in clumps. The 30th ranked guy and the 36th ranked guy might basically be the same use to your fantasy team. Or the 36th ranked guy might be way more useful to your team if they provide categories that you're looking for. Like if you're drafting them, and I tend to be a proponent of drafting the best player available, but some of that has to be best player available to your team also. Like drafting the 30th ranked guy versus the 35th ranked guy. It's the same in the broad scheme, but it's also quite possible that that 35th ranked dude might just be a better fit for your team. I don't know. Like, could Damian Lillard have been a better fit for your team than Tyrese Maxey this year? They're relatively similar from a basketball standpoint. Maxey better at field goal, Dame better at free throw. The rest of their stuff was freaking close. They were almost the same player outside of that. Maxey was ranked, 4 slots higher than Dame? They're basically the same dude, but maybe Dame was more useful. Maybe your team was extraordinary at field goal percent, and what you really needed was one of the best free throw numbers in the NBA, and you get that out of Dame. Otherwise, again, they're almost the same dude. So that type of situation, I think you can look at a board and say, yeah, those guys pretty much have the same rank. Assigning one of them, 20 and the other 23 or 24 or whatever it is, I don't want to say it's arbitrary because the math of it suggests that in a total, hyperbaric chamber, vacuum, whatever, Maxey would be slightly better for your fantasy team, but that chamber doesn't know your fantasy team. I want to make sure that people understand what I'm saying here. I don't want this discussion to be misconstrued as me saying I don't believe in ranks, because I'm not in that camp. I also don't want this discussion for me to have me pinned down as saying I need a rank. Because I believe, and I don't know, do you guys know how little time I have? All I know is the things that have been said when I've been talking with somebody. And where I stand on this, I think is a relatively unique position, but I'm hoping that most folks can kind of see the middle to it, the kind of moderation to it. I love the work. I really do. I love the work that's being done on this particular topic because it's educating the community quite a lot. And I can't find it. I don't know where it was. I remember that Josh and I had a really good discussion on this last year in September, I believe, leading up to the season. I don't remember if it was on my show. We did a nice head-to-head thing, or if it was on his. Sorry, guys. My brain ain't what it used to be. But he's doing a great job, and I thought that show was part of it, of educating on this topic of, like, is the guy that's ranked 80th better than the guy who's ranked 90th? But I think we have to make sure that that doesn't get pulled too far. And I saw some other folks on Twitter doing that, where it's like, oh, yeah, who cares? This guy's ranked 40th. This guy's ranked 65th. They're the same dude. I don't think those dudes are still in the same bucket anymore. Yes, it's true that, like, in March, maybe the 65th ranked guy is slightly better for your fantasy team, but a lot of, like, kind of punt stuff goes into that discussion. And in October, you want the guy ranked 40th over the guy ranked 65th. There's a good enough gap between those two dudes. And then people are like, okay, well, Dan, how do you find the gap? Where is the cutoff? Bucketology. Buckets, thank you again to Basketball Monster for providing these numbers. Buckets are there. You can see them in how the math adds up a player's value. You can see that there are gaps in the groupings where you've got like 5 or 6 guys that are all pretty much the same overall positive value to your fantasy team. And then there's a weird little gap in between those guys and another grouping of dudes. As you hit a certain point down the board, it's almost impossible to find those gaps. They still exist from time to time, but like once you get to about, I think I've called it no man's land before, but maybe even it's a tiny bit before that, something like, 65, 75 range. Once you get beyond about 75, the gaps are kind of hard to find. At that point, you just kind of have to be like, look, if I can get a guy who's ranked 75, that guy is just better than the guy ranked 125. It just is. But it's not like you can say, oh, well, the gap is at, number 86 or something like that. It's going to be much harder to find there, but you're going to have to take my word for it that there is some sort of difference between the guy ranked 75 and the guy ranked 120. But above that threshold, you can find the buckets Beyond that threshold, that's where you want to attack the guys with upside because you want to hunt for those dudes that can get into the more clearly pronounced upper buckets. The only problem with today's show, in my eyes, is that I have to say the word bucket a lot. And it's too many. I realize that as I say it and as I listen back to it, it's too many times. But again, I adore that this is a thing that's being pushed forward. I love that this is a topic that's being explored. Some of it is like horn tooting, I'll admit, because I feel like without really saying it, my bucket discussion from 3-4 years ago was a little bit of kind of like the kickoff on this. But other analysts have gone deeper and done a better job of really isolating how this whole system works. My job, again, is to dig into some of the numbers, but then also try to simplify it. I want to simplify it for you guys as much as humanly possible. And so that's what Bucketology is. And that's why I build out how we look at players the way that I do. We're going to do this in August. When did Yahoo Leagues open last year? I feel like they opened earlier. Did they open in late July last season? I feel like they did. And I was very happy at the time because I was like, yay, we don't have as much dead time between free agency and actual leagues opening. So hopefully they do that again. When leagues open and we get that first Yahoo board, we can immediately start looking and saying, okay, well, where are they creating buckets by kind of putting their thumb on the scales? Because they'll have their pre-ranks, and then the pre-ranks are going to influence ADP. We'll have our own. And you're like, Dan, why are you even waiting? Why don't you just make your own bucket right now? Well, first of all, we got to get through free agency. There's a lot that takes place there. That's a loaded beginning of July. But also, I kind of like to see what Yahoo does to say, interesting. And we work smarter. We work smarter, not harder on this one. If they line up a bunch of players for us, we can take them, and then we can just shuffle some names around. It's a lot easier than just building it from nothing. Because a lot of the time, I'm going to agree with their buckets, or at least close to it. I already closed the ADP window, so I don't have a great example of that right out of the chute. But as we approach the end of today's episode, I want to once again tip my cap to the incredible analysts that have been banging away on this interminably and trying to educate everybody, myself included, in being educated, not tipping my hat to myself. That would be incredibly narcissistic. I appreciate all of you. I appreciate those that are doing their rank boards because that's freaking impossible. I appreciate those that are helping me spread the gospel of simplifying the game with buckets. And I appreciate those that are pushing the issue, even arguing about it, because that's how we all get smarter. And that's one of the things that I want to do with this show is I want to talk, I want to have more voices on the podcast again. And that's something that's going to be coming back in a big way, hopefully as soon as next week. A lot of guests. I think we can all get a lot smarter when we kick ideas around. I also think that when I have a show like today, where I'm talking about sort of a way that I do things, people hear me say that, and then they're like, oh, is Dan like mad at someone, or is he disagreeing with someone in particular? No, I'm not. But the problem, of course, is when I'm just ranting solo forever, there's sort of no way for anybody to take my word on that. I mean, I hope you guys will. So now we can get all these folks back in. We can have a nice discussion on this. I'm going to disagree slightly or maybe greatly with other folks that are doing the same thing. But here's the beauty. There's more than one way to skin a cat in fantasy basketball. My way is, in my mind, the way that produces a lot of results with the lowest amount of grinding impact. That's what I'm trying to do for you guys. But that doesn't mean it's the only way or even the best way. It's just my way. So hugs and kisses. I want everybody to know I love all these analysts. I really do. I really, really do. And with the creation of this network, part of the reason that I did that is because I want to talk to all of them more. Keep your eye out on that. Folks that are watching live, I beg of you, go to my pinned tweet and subscribe somewhere because I get nothing out of you guys watching this stuff on Twitter. To everybody else, I love you. Thank you. Please subscribe. Please drop a 5-star review. Please help spread the word. It's really hard right now to start a basketball podcast in mid-May because nobody's looking for them right now. So whatever you guys can do to help continue to kind of slowly grow this thing as we begin the mighty slog through the off season, I will very much appreciate that. I am Dan Vespris. Same guy, new place, Old Man Squad. Fantasy basketball is an Old Man Squad sports network presentation. Make sure to check out our other active show right now. That's 90 Feet From Home with my good buddy Joe Orico. We will have at least one new show launching next week on the network, possibly as many as 3 to 4. It's crazy how many people have reached out. More than 20 have reached out immediately here. And I didn't even go hunting yet to be a part of this thing. Hoping I can create a podcast utopia. If you guys are interested in learning more, you can reach out to me. You can find me. Twitter is still the easiest way. But if you want to post a comment in the YouTube video after the fact, that's also fine. You can find me. I'm not that hard to find. Let's talk about it. I'm here to help you pursue your passions, and I'm here to do it. You might not believe this, just because I think we can build a sweet community out of it. That's what I'm trying to do with this new network. So hit me up if you're interested. If not, just please continue to help spread the word. We made it through a week. That's the end of the first week of the brand new show. Next week, the reason I did Bucketology today is because next week we're going to get into what I need a better name for, but it's results analysis. So we're going to be looking at ADPs, we're going to be looking at final ranks, and we're going to look at how everybody did. So this is how the universe performed this year. And there's always a lot to take away from that. Always a lot. Have a marvelous weekend, everybody. We're just going Monday through Friday right now. So, don't get your hopes up. Thanks again for watching, listening, whatever it is. I appreciate you all. See you soon.